Hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca Morton. My pronouns are she, her. I am the artist and studio manager here at Baltimore Clayworks. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual artist talk given tonight by George Rodriguez. We are thrilled that you all have joined us. Baltimore Clayworks partnered with Casa, Maryland through a grant from the Gutierrez Memorial Fund to commission George Rodriguez to make a totemic sculpture to be displayed in front of Casa's new headquarters. Back in September, we were honored to celebrate the unveiling of this incredible sculpture. Born and raised in the border city of El Paso, Texas, George Rodriguez creates humorous decorative ceramic sculpture addressing his identity and community. George received a BFA in ceramics from the University of Texas, El Paso, then went on to receive an MFA from the University of Washington. His world curiosity grew as a recipient of the Bonderman Travel Fellowship, where he traveled the world through most of 2010. His work can be found in the permanent collection of the National Mexican Museum of Art in Chicago, Hallie Ford Museum in Salem, Oregon, and the Smithsonian's Renwick Gallery, amongst others. George is represented by Foster White Gallery in Seattle, Washington. We plan to close our event by allowing time for questions. Please feel free to submit your questions in the chat box. I will now turn it over to George.
Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Okay, hopefully, thumbs up, great. So I, first want to start off by just saying how excited I am to be here in Baltimore and to be here at Baltimore Clayworks. I'm going to get a little bit into that with my talk and really just take you through a progression of where I started to the project that Rebecca talked about that we just kind of unveiled this past September here in Baltimore with Casa. So I'm going to share my screen and start showing you a couple of images here. All right, here we go. So, and please do share if you have any questions on the, share those questions with me on the chat. And then towards the end, we'll do a little Q&A. If for any reason, people outside on Zoom land, if audio isn't good or any of that, please let us know just so that we can make it as accessible as possible. But I grew up in El Paso, Texas. El Paso is right on the border with Mexico and New Mexico. And it's a city of about 680,000 people. So it's pretty big city. And if you think about Ciudad Juarez, which is the city on the Mexican side, that's about 2 million people. So overall, it's like a big metropolitan area. I always include an image of my mother and sisters because it really takes a village. And by that, I mean that I chose art as a career, which is always a little, it's tricky. So I had just like the most wonderful support system in my family. Just like they really were extremely supportive. I went to the University of Texas in El Paso for undergrad, and it's this really beautiful campus in the mountains of El Paso, in the Franklin Mountains, with this like Bhutanese architecture. And that's where I met my first ceramics class, basically. That's where I took my first ceramics class. So I initially went into undergrad knowing that I wanted to do something in the arts, but not knowing exactly what that something was. But since I was in college, it's like I need to come out with a perspective of like having a job. So I went in as a graphic design major. But as an art major, I had to take ceramics and painting and metals and sculpture, all these like introductory classes. And I actually took ceramics first to kind of just get it out of the way because I knew nothing of the medium. I thought it was painting figurines and making pottery, which at that point I was not as interested in. But having great mentors like Vince Burke really kind of like opened up all these doors for me. So Vince showed me that anything was possible, and I could just pretty much make whatever it is that was in my mind, or at least attempt to. So that first piece, Puzzled, was a self-portrait. And then I moved on to make this in one of my mold making classes, which is another self-portrait. And I was trying to create myself as like an action figure. So I wanted this work to be like articulated and like move and be posable, but my skills weren't quite there yet. So I froze these 15 figures in different poses. And step by step, they teach you how to dance the Macarena. So it's like step-by-step dance tutorial. And you know, for me, like humor always like plays like making it personal, making it a little bit funny. And then I thought, well, where am I dancing La Macarena? And it's at my sister's quinceañera. So hence the title of the piece. So another self-portrait. I was a painting minor. So this is another self-portrait. You'll kind of get a theme here. And this was me trying to decide, like, what am I doing pursuing the arts? You know, like, it's again, I was hesitant in pursuing the arts. So that's me, the mama duck, kind of leading other potential career options. Do I join the military? I was a manager at a shoe store. Do I keep doing that? Do I become an accountant? It's like really trying to like figure out who I was. Baltimore holds a special place in my heart because Baltimore hosted NCECA in 2005, and that was the first NCECA I ever attended as like a baby ceramic artist, right? I was an undergrad, first time out of El Paso, with a friend. We came to Baltimore, we got to tour the city. I came to Baltimore Clayworks. There was an amazing like wood-fired pottery show that I still have a CD, like a CD-ROM of. But I came into Baltimore and I met all of my like ceramic heroes here. You know, people that I had seen in books that were at this conference that I was just like got to interact with. It was also my first time in like a larger city, so riding the light rail and you know like giving this man experiencing homelessness a turkey sandwich, like all of that stuff was like new. These seagulls that are bananas here, like all of that was new experiences for me just growing up in El Paso. So I made this piece in NCECA Baltimore that's me, a self-portrait, kind of holding all these memories on my clothing. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to pursue ceramics as a career. And what that meant is that I needed to, or I wanted to surround myself with other artists that I admired. So I made a self-portrait surrounded by 4 other artists, and we're holding hands and playing Ring Around the Rosies because we're best friends. And those 4 other artists are Lisa Clegg, Sergei Isupov, Akio Takamori, and Tom Bartel, who all make kind of like weird figurative work, which is kind of what I'm drawn to. Toby, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. The slides are not changing. We only see, or I only see, and I think JB only sees one slide, maybe the first slide. So what you're talking about is not showing up on your screensaver?
Oh, really? Is anybody else having that issue?
Yes, hi, George. It's Joan Brady from class. I just see your home screen, slide 1, and it's not moving. Like you have to play the slideshow or something.
Oh.
Yeah, George, it does look like we're stuck on the home screen.
Oh, sorry about that, everybody. Toby, thanks for bringing that up because that's gonna be a boring talk. Okay, give me a second. I'm gonna stop this share and see if I can re-share this.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So many. What is there? What do you?
Now something changed. Now I see recess. Now I see Sergei Supov and
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Oh, wonderful. Are you looking at it in full screen or is it in a smaller?
No, it's full screen with the side of, your talking head is on the right. It's a hard thing to ask, but could you start over so we could see what you were talking about before?
Definitely. I'll kind of give you the cliff notes of this, but definitely.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. You've seen that image a lot. You don't need to look at that one again. Okay. This is where I grew up, El Paso, Texas, border city. My family, who, again, like support system, my mother in the center, 4 sisters, 4 older sisters. So I'm the youngest of 5. Studied at the University of Texas, El Paso for undergrad. And this is the first piece that I made in undergrad. So this is my intro to ceramics, like sculpture. And it was a pretty open-ended. I ended up making a self-portrait and it's titled Puzzled, because I was still trying to like figure myself out as a person, right? As we continuously are. Vince Burke is my undergrad mentor, who to this day still teaches at UTEP in El Paso and is a good friend of mine. This is a body of work, my sister's quinceañera, that kind of step-by-step teaching you how to dance La Macarena. So there's 15 figures. And this is the painting of me trying to like choose a career path. So like Mama Duck and the 3 other possible career choices. I had examples of people in the military. So that was the first kind of thought. It's like, to see the world, you join the military, which I think is a different thought now for me. And then Baltimore, Ensica in Baltimore, this is a sculpture that I made for that. Like coming back from Ensica and experiencing, meeting all these great artists and also just like getting a sense of the city and getting to know like who these artists were. Okay, so this is close to where we left off, but I decided after like pursuing graphic design and then pursuing a teaching degree and not finding too much joy in those 2 fields for me. I love teaching, but like getting a degree was not in the direction that I was going. I found myself in the ceramic studio like all of the time. So I decided, okay, I'm going to pursue a BFA in clay. And in order to do that, I need to surround myself with people that are successful in this field that I like. So I made that piece, Ring Around the Rosie, next to, made myself friends with Lisa Clegg, Sergei Zupov, Akio Takamori, and Tom Barta. And then my exit show like my BFA show, I made a series of these 16 figures that were placed outside in a public area of the university. And for me, it was like, I've always been interested in how people interact with art when you're not going into the gallery space. Like, how does public art affect, people's everyday environment? So this is kind of my first baby steps into public art. So the pieces lived outside for about a week. I went to Seattle for grad school. So I moved to Seattle for graduate school. And the main reason was to like pursue an MFA at the University of Washington. And that was like, when I decided to get a BFA, my next logical step was like, okay, I should also pursue an MFA so that I can have, again, career opportunities. At least that was my thought. And my main driver for going to the University of Washington was to study with this wonderful human, Akio Takamori. So I was like, so happy to like work alongside him. And there I discovered Doug Jeck and his amazing like figurative work. So also feel really fortunate to work with him. And Doug Jeck passed away earlier this year. Akio Takamori passed away about 5 years ago. So it's kind of like, these people that have made such an impact on me, they I keep their teachings and I can see their work, which is just so valuable, even though they're not physically here anymore. And then at that same time, I met Jamie Walker, who was my third professor at the University of Washington. And then John Taylor, who is an instructional tech at UW. So all of these people kind of form the way that I think about and make some of my own work. So I moved from El Paso, which is high desert, very kind of more barren landscape, brush, to Seattle that's very lush and green, and there's so much water and there's abundance of flora. So that's when I started to do more like ornamentation and embellishment. This was the first piece that I made in undergrad, a matador and a bull. University of Washington had some big kilns that I could stand inside of. So like, okay, I need to make something larger. I felt like a very capable maker, so I wanted to take advantage of their facilities. And I wanted a way to mimic embroidery, this like beautiful pattern on the matador's embroidered traje de luces, which is like a suit of colors, is what suit of light is what it translates to. So I wanted to mimic this like traje de luces, and I started to use a sprig technique, which is basically adding decoration to the surface. So I made my first ornamental sprig to mimic embroidery. Those are actual tassels that are fabric tassels. And then I grew up in the 90s, so that's Chicago Bulls, because they're amazing. And this is kind of a, like the greenware version of me in graduate school. So you can kind of get a sense of scale. And, I grew up, or not grew up, but like I studied painting and I love painting and I love looking at my work in 2D as well as 3D. So anytime that I would make a 3D sculpture, I would also try to reinterpret that same sculpture in 2 dimensions. Because in 2D, you don't have to worry about gravity. You don't have to worry about like space. You can foreshorten things. You can create an environment a lot easier. So this is a silk screen of the matador and the bull. And then my thesis work from grad school was a series of these 9 mariachi figures. And I like to include just a little like step-by-step on how I made this, and I'll go pretty quick through this, but I usually start with slabs of clay and the sprig ornamentation and kind of prep. At this point, I started building all of these 8 of these figures all together so that they could fit and line up. And as I'm working, I'm like decorating, adding some of this ornamentation and, trying to manage the dryness and the timing of the clay work. I always say that when you're working large scale, you need to be nice to people. I mean, you should be nice to people regardless, but you're asking for a lot of help with larger pieces. So that's Shelby Stewart and Jacob Foran, who are 2 grad students helping me move some of the work into a kiln. Also, ceramics is very humbling, right? So as the story goes, we tried to get one of these figures into the kiln, it crumbled. So now we're down to 7. I tried to get a second piece into the kiln, that fell apart. So now 6 aren't really a band anymore. So I went into my studio, broke the other 6, and then started over again. Engineered a little bit different. And if you took the workshop today, I built them with an interior support. The first few did not have that interior. The first 8 did not have the interior support inside of them. So I built 3 at a time so that I could move them into a kiln while they were still a little like leather hard. So I ended up making 9 instead of the 8. So those are the bodies. Those are the heads that would eventually sit inside of those bodies. So again, trying to make them a little more humorous and not like, a specific person. That's the pieces with glaze and the boots underneath. And then that's a finished piece. And that was the first view of the work that you would see walking into the gallery. So this creates about a 20-foot wall. The pieces are about 7 feet tall. So that something is happening on the other side. but you can't really see the full picture, right? So my idea was really about community and where we as people place ourselves within community. So you walk into the space, you see the back, and you can be on the outside of this work and wonder like, oh, what's on the other side? Or you can take you can walk around the sides and stand on the edges and get a better picture. It's like, oh yeah, you get a clearer image, but you're still on the peripheries. You're still kind of on the outside looking in. Or you can take a chance and like walk into the space and be fully embraced and enveloped in, something that might seem a little unfamiliar. So it was about me kind of like integrating into like different spaces. I was lucky enough that out of like right before I left grad school, I won this life-changing fellowship called the Bonderman Travel Fellowship that took me to about 26 countries in the span of 10.5 months. So in 2010, I pretty much spent my entire year just like traveling. And I first started at these places that like, I started in South America, went to parts of Asia, Eastern Europe, and just, kind of absorbed and experienced different cultures. And I show that not to show you like a travel journal, but to, plant some seeds for later on. I came back from that year, really energized, also, really full of just like a wanderlust of like travel and experiencing new things. And I came back, spent all of my money, but had set myself up a residency at Pottery Northwest in Seattle. It's a 2-year program. It's a wonderful, for me, it's a wonderful transitional program because out of grad school, I left to travel. I didn't have a studio set up. It's kind of hard to do that right out of school. So I came, spent 2 years, made some work, and for my exit show from Pottery Northwest, I was thinking about this sculpture by James Frazier, The End of the Trail, but more specifically, Luis Jimenez's version of End of the Trail with electric sunset. And Luis Jimenez is an artist that is from my hometown. He's from El Paso. He, was well regarded in the art world. So he was an example of somebody that like made it from a place that I was from. So I loved his work. I used to visit the sculpture at the library at my undergrad all the time. So I made a couple mock-ups of what my version was going to look like, on a horse, on a toy horse, on a sawhorse, on a bench. And I ended up going with the version on a sawhorse, and this is kind of how I started building the figures, and then that's what the finished piece eventually looked like. And that's the back of the sculpture with kind of the sunrise. And my version of the sculpture is titled End of the Trail with Electric Sunrise, because it felt like I was done with the residency and I was kind of really stepping into my artistic independence in a way. So I've been fortunate enough to show work with a gallery in Seattle, Foster White Gallery. And I was first in a group show in 2010 while I was traveling. And then they asked me to have a show with them in 2011, my first solo show. And I was, I didn't know what to make. I know that I have a show schedule. I didn't know where to start. So when I started in undergrad making those self-portraits, I kind of reverted to that. So I'm like, well, I'll make a self-portraiture show. I'll make the George show. It's my first solo. And for me, the self-portrait was always a way, it was kind of a defense mechanism. It's like, I could do this and people can't tell me that I'm doing it wrong because I'm doing it about myself, right? It was also a way to just kind of express my thoughts and be a little bit, just more guarded. So I made Rodriguez with Flowers, which is the self-portrait with the flower ornamentation. And then I thought about, what about all these other Georges, like my tocayos? And a tocayo is a namesake, somebody who shares the same name as you. So I thought about my tocayo, George Washington, and how would I interpret that portrait? Or my tocayo, George Burns, or Curious George, Boy George. So I made this show of like all these different Georges. And they all started as my face initially, that very first Rodriguez with flowers face. And then they morphed into all these other Georges like George Orr. And then my 2D version of that, if you can see a little bit of like silver and gold on the background, that's a silk screen of my face with an ink drawing of the other Georges superimposed to kind of depict that transition of like a mold made object with the manipulation of trying to change the appearance. I usually work in themes whenever I'm like composing different shows. And with Foster White, I've been with them 10 years and I've had 7 solo shows with them in those 10 years. So this is In Costume in 2012. And In Costume was my version of, can I do a self-portrait without a figure? So after the George show, people are like, are you a narcissist? You only make all these Georges. So I made a narcissist dress, which is a daffodil. Airy kind of is in the style of papel picado, which is like a pierced paper. And it depicts these flowers from the Pacific Northwest. That was my new home. And in the back, which you can't really see, is a landscape of the Southwest, which is my other home. So trying to kind of like, you know, put myself in the pieces without my face. My mother is also a seamstress, so my mother makes all these like dresses for my siblings and other people. Hereafter, talked about like gathering spaces and how we gather as people. So I really have always loved these community altars that and roadside altars that people create, and they're, you know, as much for the person that had moved on as for the people that are still there, like celebrating. So I made these offerings that were these, you know, markers to gather around, these like bouquets of flowers. Beneath the Surface, this was in 2016, was the first time that I was really starting to make sense of my travel experience. You know, I traveled in 2010 and it took me about 5 to 6 years to like make sense of that whole 10.5 months of traveling. So similar to the George show, I started with my self-portrait and then morphed these faces into other people that I didn't know who they were. So once I figured out and set the features and the face itself told me like, okay, I'm like complete, then I would figure out what their background was, where did they come from, what part of the world, what color scheme works with that culture. And I started to create these narratives for these other people. I also started to look at more like statuary and try and reinterpret my own versions of these like statues. So like I love these large Olmec heads, and I wanted to make my own versions. This would be like a little baby Olmec head. I also started to make these connections between places I had visited, and the Hanuman in Thailand. And when I saw that, I was like, I've seen that before. Where did I see it? And I had seen it in Puno, Peru for a Catholic procession, the Virgen de Candelaria. And I'm like, this demon looks exactly like the Hanuman. And they're like, you know, and oceans and continents apart, but they have a similar appearance and feeling. So I was starting to like build these threads of like cross-cultural connection. So I made my own version of the Hanuman, and then reinterpret it. It's like, well, what's my guardian? And my guardian is that I grew up with, and it's a luchador. So I made El Santo as my version. I was looking at Western and Eastern design. So a lion, you know, I saw all these wonderful lions in like state houses and political houses, and all these beautiful lions, Eastern lions, and like temples. So I wanted to kind of like mix these two aesthetics and create my own version of, again, another like statuary form. And this just shows you the building technique of how I would decorate as I'm going and, and create and so forth. And I include this because that little cat found a, nice little temple within the piece itself. In 2016, I also, started to create some work that I titled the Sanctuary series. And in 2016, we had a presidential election. So I was, not feeling great about it. And a lot of my friends were feeling marginalized and kind of attacked. So I made a self-portrait on my feelings on the State of the Union, feeling like anger and sadness and despair. And at that point, I was also looking at some statuary from Teotihuacan in Mexico. And I love these little statues that they found in the tombs in Teotihuacan. And for me, they felt like companion figures. They would kind of lead you into your, they would kind of guide you and lead you. So I thought of them as companions. So I used this form to make the Sanctuary series, which was a series of different figures of myself. This is a self-portrait as a Mexican-American titled We the People. And then other friends and other communities that were, being marginalized and villainized. So Indigena talks a little bit about indigenous culture. And I was thinking about indigenous cultures in the States, but also about indigenous cultures in the Americas as a whole. So how through like colonialism, we've taken other influences and then like reinterpret them, remained resilient, and then adapted them for our own, like our own traditions, new traditions. Debutante speaks a little bit about beauty standards and who gets to decide different beauty standards. So I grew up going to quinceañeras, which is a girl's like 15 years birthday. And then I learned about the debutante ball and like how similar those are to a quinceañera. But really like, beauty standards, it depends on like who is choosing those beauty standards. And one of my favorite artists, Grayson Perry, I find like really plays that line with within their own work. So the Sanctuary series, like all of these pieces are about 4 feet tall. They're all, a lot of them besides the self-portrait are communities that I don't, personally belong to. So I'm not a Black person. I'm not LGBTQ. I'm not like a mother. So for me, a lot of this work was talking to my friends, making sure that I was respectfully creating these statues to be like admired and looked at, but not stereotyping. So it was more so about like the research that went behind making the work. And I had an opportunity to show this work at in my hometown in El Paso. And because it was in El Paso, in my border hometown, I made a Tia Katrina and an Uncle Sam. And for me, these represent the border, the US and Mexico. They also represent my identity. And they're these guardians that are protecting this like sacred space of this like promenade space of these sanctuary figures. And Katrina and Uncle Sam are very different, but they hold the same type of space, right? Like color-wise, feeling-wise, they feel very different, but they're equal. With Pottery Northwest, and kind of a thing that I've been interested in doing has been more of these like communal events. So with Pottery Northwest in Seattle, we created this community altar that we unveiled kind of in a raku style. And we invited the community to write down their hopes, their dreams, fears, and then we send them into the altar once we opened it and send them out into the world. And that was a collaboration with 2 other artists that helped build the kiln and kind of like set it all up. And this was the eventual finished piece after, remaking a couple parts. And this altar talks a little bit about foundation. So the 4 columns on the bottom are the 4 corners of the world, or the elements: wind, water, earth, fire. The next piece on top is a wolf and a lion. So for me, that's like a duality and this primal nature. The dome is death and faith. And then the crown on the top is us people, our community. And, it sits as this crown, but if you remove all of this foundation underneath, then the crown like sits on the floor and it can get really easily lost. So for me, it was about, I build all these stories around the work when I'm creating it. And I'm really fortunate that the University of Texas El Paso acquired this piece for one of their new buildings. So just the way that I had the opportunity to visit Luis Jimenez's sculpture when I was an undergrad, I'm so excited that my work now gets to hopefully provide a similar, feeling to some younger folk. Okay, so I, get a little emotional when I talk about the sanctuary work and the altar, because it's all like really heavy. And sometimes I need to like bring humor back into my pieces. So this is a portrait of my partner, and actually my partner's clown, Princess Mildred, as the queen. So you can kind of see the clown nose on the tail. And it's not the king of the jungle, it's the queen. And this is my version of like the pair's self-portrait of that companionship. So this is me howling at the moon with the queen, and you can tell it's me because of the socks on the sculpture. So I love this. I love this sculpture by Ai Weiwei, Circle of Animal, that talks about the Chinese zodiac. So I made my version of the Chinese zodiac. So I made initially the Chinese zodiac in these vase forms. So I took all the 12 animals and reinterpreted, reimagined those 12 animals. So I'm You're the Dog, which is the bottom right corner there. And then I thought, well, I want to bring those closer to home. So instead of a dragon, in Mexico, we don't have the dragon, but we have a quetzalcoatl. And a quetzalcoatl is a feathered serpent, which is basically a dragon, right? So I made a quetzalcoatl. Instead of the Year of the Rat, would be El Año del Chapulín, which is the year of the grasshopper. And I chose characteristics that I thought worked well with their parallel animals. And then I reinterpreted the other 10 to create 12 animals of the Mexican zodiac, which there's an Aztec zodiac, but there's no like Mexican zodiac until this kind of translation that I made. Not to say that my interpretation is what I'm trying to say. So this is my gallerist, kind of like with the horns and the other people that work in the gallery. And when I first started with them, 10 years ago, I was really intimidated to work with them. And after 10 years working together, they're like family, they're friends. We can be, I feel really comfortable around them. So this body of work was made for the Seattle Art Fair in 2018. And the idea was always to make 5 different series of the zodiac, the Mexican zodiac. So this is series number 2. Alebrijes, and an alebrije is a small, typically wooden painted animal from the area of Oaxaca in Mexico, very colorful. This is El Zodiaco en Metálico, which is glazed bronze, glazed to look like bronze, but it's all ceramic. And this is my like homage to the Ai Weiwei originals. I haven't finished the 4th version, so I skipped over to the 5th, which was a collaboration with other artists that identify as Mexican or Chicane. And these other artists are not necessarily clay artists. So Eric Garcia, who is the bottom right, is illustrator and political cartoonist. So he made the iguana and that piece is called 1977, which is the year he was born. And all the people that worked on these pieces were born the year of their animal. So if we move to the burro, the donkey on the top left, that's Christy Tirado, who's a printmaker who used kind of a sgraffito because she does a lot of woodblock printing. And that was kind of a translation of her technique. Carolina Jimenez, who lives in Brooklyn, made the venado azul, the deer right in the center. And that's all textile. She's a weaver. So we made the ears so that she could weave in between the ears. And the horns are made with just yarn that's like tied together. So there's no wire or anything. It's just like the fabric itself holding itself. So that's been one of the most exciting projects for me, the collaborative El Zodiaco Familiar. Lately, what I've been doing have been these like bigger communal projects. So I worked with Mad Art in Seattle, Clay Art Center in Tacoma, Washington, and Mud Shark Studios in Portland, Oregon. And we invited people into my studio in Seattle to come and make tiles. We ended up making about 6,000 tiles. That's Liz Wiegand, who's my assistant, who's been helping me for about 6 years now. We individually painted all of these tiles. Gustavo Martinez, who was one of the Zodiac participants, who helped me build these small rooms. And what we ended up with was this show called Reflect and Gather, where there was a gathering space, a little plaza space in the middle for community to come together, talk, discuss ideas, get to know each other, sit on these small benches, enjoy these beautiful plants, but then step into these rooms, and like these were reflection rooms where you can step in, meditate, think about these conversations that you had. And these rooms were fully decorated on the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. So you were completely surrounded by ornamentation. And we had 2 of these fully encased ceramic rooms, ceramic tile rooms. And we had a 3rd room that was all live clay. So it was a wet room where when we first started, it was completely smooth. And then as more and more people came, they could leave their mark, they could add something. And you could see how the community was affecting the space. So the floor also had clay on it, so you can leave your footprints and so forth. And this ran for about a month. So every day I would have to go in and like water the room to keep it wet, which was a nice meditative practice also. And I got to see what people, how it changed from day to day. I moved to Philadelphia 3 years ago. And when I moved to Philly, I made, I'm affected by my environment. So I made a giant rat and a giant pigeon. And I made them because these are animals that really have like a lot of, they add to the dynamics of these like urban environments. And they're often overlooked and they're often mistreated. So I wanted to make them, and give them a kind of a higher standing and presence. I also was thinking about guardians in general and like who decides what guardians we get to create. So I started to make all of these separate heads that could be changed onto different bodies. So I made a rat that had all these interchangeable heads, right? So one day I might feel like the chola might fit on the blue rat head, or the next day I might feel like the luchador could fit on the red pigeon. And you can kind of like play around, and all of these heads were interchangeable with about 7 or 8 different bodies. During the pandemic, the height of lockdown in 2020, I was invited to create an altar for Day of the Dead, which is coming up first week of November. And I made this La Flor, El Nicho y sus Memorias. And what I made was a representation of Mictlantecutli, who is the Aztec god of death. And I made all these little skulls and invited people to leave little offerings, leave small, ofrendas. So they could take a skull, build a body, and kind of leave it behind. This was at the time where you could only have like 1 or 2 people in a space at a time. Things were just opening up. So even though we were there, a lot of people were there by themselves or with, with a friend. there was never a large gathering, but over the course of time, just like that wet clay room, you could see that other people had been there before because you saw effects of change in those spaces. So for me, it was a nice reminder that we, even though we're not visibly together, we're not alone, right? So that leads me to Casa Baltimore. So last year, 21, I, alongside Nicole Fall and Baltimore Clayworks, we got this wonderful grant and opportunity to work with Casa Maryland, Casa Baltimore, and go into the community and teach these, 1 hour, 2 hour workshops and let people like make and know what clay was, with the ultimate goal of creating a public sculpture that would live in their community. So we went in, met folks from the community. I made 3 little mock-ups of what a potential larger scale public sculpture would look like, and then had the community vote. So there's those cups, they had little tickets, and people that would come in through the course of a few weeks or a month would leave their ticket and vote on their favorite sculpture. And Casa Baltimore, Casa Maryland does like, helps with job placements for like recent migrants and a lot of like migrant advocacy and just like help. So I wanted the sculpture to kind of depict migration a little bit. So they ended up choosing that center sculpture. So then I created a larger version of that in my studio in Philly. And then just this summer, I think it's actually this September, we installed it on site, and there was a lovely graduation that happened alongside the unveiling of this sculpture. So this was a year in the making. It was displayed here at Clayworks for a month and a half before it eventually went to its permanent site. So that lives in Baltimore. So if you're in the Baltimore area, you should stop by, say hello, take a picture, tag me, all of that, all of the good stuff. And then the last sculpture, and what's been taking a lot of my time recently, is this large installation for the Kansas City airport. Kansas City is building a brand new airport. And I got one of the 1% for the Arts commissions. So I proposed this sculpture, Let the Music Take You. This is a mock-up version of what that sculpture would look like. And they're all jazz musicians taking their jazz instruments on the go, right? Because it's an airport. And this is a version of some of the pieces as I'm making them green. And then this is what they look like in the transformation of the firing. So you can kind of see how the blues got a lot richer. Some of the skin tones changed. I don't like to glaze a lot of the skin tones, so I left that up to just like the clay body. So I tried different clay bodies, changed different types of firings. And then this is what the scale of the piece is. So they're all about 8 feet tall, and they're gonna sit on a 30-foot plinth. So I just delivered these to Kansas City this Monday, actually, not even a week ago, crazy. So I delivered these to Kansas City on Monday. They're in a storage facility. We're gonna install at some point in November, but I'm so excited to put these out. And all of their clothing, all of the ornamentation has to do with some aspect of Kansas City, whether it's barbecue, jazz music, the Negro Leagues baseball, fountains, the Art Institute, etc. And I'm working on a solo show for Foster White, another one that's opening up in February. And that is tied to my travels again. So I'm reinterpreting these different statues from each of the countries that I visited along my travels. So I have this wonderful picture, the most magical picture I've had of me in Peru with a rainbow and a monkey and a parrot. And it's just so I made that, and every place will have its own sculpture like that. All right, thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate you. Woo. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thanks for sticking with me through those technical difficulties. But yeah, if you have any questions, let me know. You can type them in the chat, or if you're here in the room with me, you can just ask me as well. I just saw all the messages that people sent saying they couldn't see the slides. I apologize for not seeing those earlier. Okay.
Yes, I apologize. I apologize about that for George. Thank you, Joan and Toby, for bringing that to our attention. I thought it was on my end, so sorry that you had to repeat some of the lecture.
No, not at all. You know, like I shared a screen, but I shared the wrong screen. So it's definitely, being 3 years on Zoom, you'd think I'd figure it out by now, but apparently I didn't. So Toby has a question. Talk about your use for surface finish on my beautiful work. Thank you. So I usually finish the work with just underglaze, commercial underglazes. And yeah, so I usually just like put all the ornamentation, and all the ornamentation is made with sprig molds. And the sprig molds are a plaster mold that then I could just like stick the ornamentation on the surface. And then after it gets bisque fired, I'll do a wash over the entire piece. Typically a black wash, black stain, just like black mason stain and a little flux mixed together. Stain the whole thing to antique it, and then it's just commercial underglaze painted over the surface with little bits of gloss just to catch your eye from a distance. But all of my glazes are pretty much just like commercial glazes. Firing temperature. So I will typically fire to cone 6. Oh, there we go. So most of my work is cone 6. It really depends on like what it is I'm making. But if I have an idea where it's like, I need terracotta to get this idea across, then I'll fire to whatever temperature terracotta is. But for the majority of my work, and most of the work that you saw, it's all like cone 6 stoneware. And I use Akio Takamori, who's my mentor. I use his stoneware recipe, which is like very groggy, very sandy, very forgiving. But that fires to cone 6. But it can go up to 10, but I typically fire to cone 6. What temperature? Any other questions? How do I fire an 8-foot sculpture? Good question. So a lot of the sculpture, when it's finished, it's 8 feet, but when it's as I'm making it, the biggest section is 5 feet. So they get assembled. I kind of showed a little bit on that when I was doing the Uncle Sam and the Katrina. They're like that one, they get stacked on top of each other. The Uncle Sam and Katrina are just held by like gravity. For the musicians that are going to Kansas City, because it's a permanent sculpture, they get epoxied in place. So most of the heads come off, and those heads are like 2.5 to 3 feet, and the body is about 5 feet. 5 feet is still pretty big. So I've been using the resources at the Tyler School of Art at Temple because they have a large enough kiln to accommodate that. And when I first started in undergrad, my scale was about 2.5, 3 feet because that was the limit of the kiln. So when I went to grad school, I was able to make that bigger piece because I had that resource. And then I later learned like, oh, I can make things in sections and then stack them together. So. Great. Any last questions? Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
I just want to mention our annual Winter Fest starts November 18th at 6 p.m. and it runs through December 30th. And George will have mugs and pins available in our shop. So thank you, George, for everything. And thank you for everyone for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.